Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Vicente Soto III will lead the chamber in prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. 1 Chronicles 4:10, verse 10. Jabez cried out to the Lord of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I may be free from pain." And God granted his prayer. Lord, just like Jabez, we cry out to you to please bless our people. Bless each and every Filipino living here and abroad. Surround us with your favor. Reveal yourself to each one of us, so that we can draw closer to you. Give each of us the means to earn a living and be prosperous, so that we will be self-sufficient and not be in need. Lord, we pray that you protect our territory and enlarge it. You have given us a country rich in natural resources. We pray that you safeguard it so that it will not be abused or squandered, that it will remain in the hands of Filipinos for generations to come, to be enjoyed and richly benefit our descendants. Enrich our soil, enliven our seas, and purify our air, O Lord. Let our country be distinguished among countries for its richness, beauty, and the godliness of its people. Lord, thank you for your many promises of protection. Keep our country and our people in the shadow of your wings until all these calamities have passed by. And lastly, Lord, please keep us from pain. We understand that in life there are seasons, some good, some bad. Help us to understand that every season is an opportunity to know you better. And just like Jabez, we humbly ask that you grant our prayer today. Thank you, Lord, for your faithfulness. We look forward to what you have in store for our future. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Majority Leader. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel. Hindi. Present, Ligarda.
Angara wala. With 24 senators, meaning all senators present, I am happy to declare the presence of a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to defer the reading and the approval of the journal at a later time.
Is there any objection to defer the reading of the journal? There being none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to acknowledge some guests in the Senate. The guests of Senator Drilon, SEC Chairperson Teresita Herbosa, and SEC Commissioner Blas James Viterbo, and guests from the Novaliches High School grade 11 students. Also guests of Senator Subiri from the province of Bukidnon, the Vice Mayor Sulpicio Galliano Jr. and Councilor Jab Hipulia, Renato Solatan Jr. and Carl Silvestre Eleazar. Also guests of Senator Hontiveros, Gablab Network, Association of the Transgender People of the Philippines, Metro Manila Pride, Metropolitan Community Church of Quezon City, Psychological Association of the Philippines, UP 1s through name and Beehive, Mr. President. Guest of Senator Pangilinan, the National Movement of Young Legislators, Region 1 Chapter, and the barangay officials of Nagcarla, Laguna, headed by Vice Mayor Ami Hernandez. We welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests.
Mr. President, may I move for a 1-minute suspension to allow the members of the Senate to greet Senator Risa Ontiveros a very happy birthday on February 24, 2017.
There being no objection, session is suspended for a few minutes.
Dito sen, tama ka ha?
You want the floor?
Bottle of water.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, Senator Richard Gordon wishes to take the floor. I move that we recognize Senator Gordon.
Before I recognize Senator Gordon, request from the chair to maintain silence, please, so we can hear the speech of Senator Gordon. So Senator Gordon is recognized to speak on a matter of public interest.
Thank you, Mr. President. Maraming salamat po. I speak today with a heavy heart. Not because sinampal ako na ibibigay sa ibang committee ang aking inimbestiga. Hindi po ako natatakot doon. I speak from the standpoint of a senator who ran because the Senate is a place of dignity, of honor, of trust. It is the people's forum. Kung di po makatakbo ang tao sa korte dahil napakahirap, kailangan ng abogado, ang tatakbuhan po niyan ay tayo mga senador, ang ating mga congressman. Tayo po ay maraming oras na ginugugol at lahat tayo pinipilit natin magtrabaho ng maayos para ang katotohanan at ang pagbabago ng bagong batas ay makakalap natin at maisasagawa. Recently, Mr. President, I have consulted, with all due respect to you and to the majority of Lord Leader concerning mga reports ng committee na dapat harapin natin. I have submitted my committee report on justice a few months ago. And I'm shocked na pati yung report ni Senator Grace po sa Mamasapano, hanggang sa ngayon, ay hindi pa natin na-approve. Kung hindi natin na-aprobahan yan, sayang ang oras. Maraming beses tayong inaakusa at tayo ay imbestiga ng imbestiga, wala naman nangyayari. On my honor, I have investigated many matters here and I have filed bills here in the Senate. In my first task as senator of this country, in my first term, when I finish a report, my staff, during the investigation, before, during, and after, spend long hours researching, poring over statements, poring over affidavits, and analyzing all the things na makikita natin na pwedeng tanungin. Some of my staff are very young people. Some of them are under bar. And yet I make tremendous demands, as I've always done so. I like surrounding myself with young people. Because young people, to my mind, dapat hubugin natin kagad para sila ay magkakaroon ng spine o ng pananindigan sa mga darating na paghamon ng ating bansa na napakaraming challenges, napakaraming hamon. It's a country that is afloat. Maraming salita. Noong araw, nung ako'y bata, nandito ako sa Constitutional Convention. Bago yon, nagsalita si Father Ortiz. Kami nasa UP Student Council. Ano sabi nila? This country is sitting in a social volcano. Hanggang ngayon, yan ang sinasabi. We've seen many, many things happen in this country. Parties change. People cross party lines. Kung sino nakaupo, doon papasok. And slowly, I suppose, through the years, hindi lang nung panahon ng modern Philippines, but siguro nung panahon ng Kastila, napilitan tayong basagin ang ating pader na nilagay ng mga Kastila noong araw. Kaya nahihirapan tayong manindigan. Kung sino nakaupo, doon tayo. At nakakalimutan yung prinsipyo. At kung magkamisan ang mga hamon sa aking sarili ng mga nakaraan, pagbigyan ko na ba, hayaan ko na lang, o wag na ako, tumahimik na lang ko, ibigay ko na lang yung Subic, o ibigay ko na lang yung mayor ng Olongapo, na wala ng batas-batas, at hinahabol ko hanggang batas. Payagan ko na lang, hindi pinapairal yung automated election law, and alam nyo, hinahabol ko yan hanggang sa Korte Suprema. 2 beses, para mailagay lamang yung tamang pamaraan sa eleksyon na ating ginawa dito sa Senado. Recently, lumabas ang isang tao na dati ng testigo. Hindi ko po siya inimbita rito doon sa investigasyon ng EJK. Ang nag-imbita po dyan ay isang senadora natin. Tinuloy ko lahat. I will remind the Senate, nung nagpalit tayo, nakakashock yun. Papalitan mo isang committee chairman dahil mukhang naligawan landas. Dahil nagbabakbakan sila ng Pangulo. At the Senate changed her. Hindi easy thing to do yun. Kaya sabi ko, papayag ako, hawakan ko yan, para ilagay natin yung senador sa committee. And we did. At nung hinawakan ko yan, wala nang agawa ng mikropono. Pinilit ko ang dignidad ng Senado ay maayos. Hinayaan ko magtanong ang mga senador. Sabi ng isa, ako raw ay mahaba magsalita. Talaga po mahaba ako magsalita, pero may laman naman ho siguro. At sinasabi ko po, you have 10 minutes, kung maayos ang gagawin nyo, hanggang gusto nyo, basta nasa lugar. Hindi po ako magtitake na sides. Nung umarapit ang taong ito, kasama nung matobato, tinatanong ko kung totoo yung sinasabi nila. Anong nangyari ngayon? Binago na ang salita. Bigla na lang nagkaroon ng konsyensya di umano. May istorya na kumakalat na nung inopera raw, nakita niya ang Panginoon. At nagbago na siya ng salita. I couldn't care less if he pointed the president, but he should have done that at the first hearing. That was his chance. When he failed to do that, he lied. He lied to this Senate. Pag inimbitahan kayo sa Senado, ang bao mo ay katotohanan. You are required to speak the truth. That is why the first thing we do is ask them to raise their hand and say, do you swear to tell the truth? Hindi tumigil doon. The whole truth. Hindi ka piraso, buong katotohanan. And nothing but the truth in the said proceeding. And the answer was yes. 4 months later, magbabago ka after insulting the Senate, after we did a lot of work to craft the legislation that was necessary, and say you're changing your mind, you're bothered by conscience. Maybe so. So far as I'm concerned, and I'm just speaking for myself, Mr. President, I do not claim there are 24 individuals here. And I respect everybody. I may not agree with them. Sometimes they may be disagreeable, but I respect them. But the point is, Mr. President, you come here and you lie, you only get 1 chance. You do not get a second chance. There are options, Mr. President. You can go to the Ombudsman. File your complaint there. The Ombudsman is not exempted from investigating anybody in this country. And if the decision is for impeachment, you still go to the lower house. Pero dito, I said, ang sampal ay hindi kay Dick Gordon. Ang sampal ay sa Senado. Nagsinungaling ka. At kung nagsinungaling ka sa Senado, hindi kita papakinggan. Pag pinakinggan kita, yung kasabihan sa wikang English, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, I believe that. There's no second chance. Walang baril na nakatutok sa ulo ni Las Cañas nung siya yung marap dito. Walang nagsabi na siya ay binayaran. Today, binayaran siya. Now, supposing he had told the truth, right there, the result would have been different. We might have considered that there was a double death squad. We would have pursued the investigation further. Because now, there was somebody na sinasabi na siya ang leader ng death squad, na sinabi niya at that time. Hindi niya sinabi. He even controverted the testimony of Matubato. He said, media hype. He said all kinds of things. Hindi totoo yan. Sinabi niya si Matubato ay kasosyo niya sa negosyo, nagpartihan sila ng 800,000. Marami pa siyang sinabi, Mr. President. Tinignan ko yung video nung humarap siya. Ba totoo, lalaki humaharap. Hindi isang tao natatakot. Walang kaba. After all, matagal lang pulis yan. At nung siya'y nagpulis, Mr. President, to wear that uniform, kailangan sumumpa ka. Sumumpa ka to protect and serve our people. Tapos ngayon, sasabihin niya, pagkatapos wasakin ang integridad niya at pati Senado, magkakaroon ng duda na tayo ay partisan? I cannot decide, Mr. President, on my own. Nasa television tayo 24 all the time, 14 hours, 9 hours. Nakikita ng tao kung totoo sinasabi, nagsisinungaling. So the people are also forming their own conclusions on the matter. And so when he lies, Mr. President, and we go to the decision, you cannot accuse us of partisanship. Because I have never been partisan insofar as what is right and what must be done. I've been tested in the Constitutional Convention. I voted to ban Mr. Marcos. I was told, don't vote for that. 3 times. I told Mr. Manglapos, pag bumalik ako dyan, tinatawag ko ng Pangulo, pag bumalik ako dyan, at nagbago ako, nabili ako. I was the Senator Manglapos at the time. Pero in this particular instance, Mr. President, this is the Senate. This is not our own personal gratification or convenience na matatakot tayo, baka magalit ang tao na hinahanap ang katotohanan ng isang tao na nagsabi ng kasinungalingan, pagbigyan na natin. Di ba yan ang sinasabi sa ating bansa? We are a forgiving country. Ang dali natin makalimot. Yan ang sinasabi sa atin. Kung gano'n, kalimutan na natin, ulitin natin. Paano ngayon? Hindi ba ang unang tanong dyan ng lahat siguro? Nagsasabi ka na ba ng totoo ngayon o hindi? That is why I say, ilipat natin siya. Life has become cheap in this country, Mr. President. Words are cheap. This man, who now claims he's telling the truth, do you want to believe this man? He now says, I was hired. Well, let's put it this way. Nung pumasok sa pulis, hired ka, may sweldo ka. Nag-uniforme ka, you take an oath to protect and to serve. Now he says, I was hired to say this. Yung sinabi niya, ang unang papaniwalaan yan, Mr. President, is he hired? Is he paid? He says, I was hired to murder. Para pumatay. June Pala was assassinated 14 years ago. September 2003. 14 years later, ang tagal naman ng konsyensya mo. Tapos sasabihin niya, naiiyak ako, pinatay ko yung dalawang kapatid ko. Aba, si Cain, isa lang ang pinatay. Ito, dalawa. Papaniwalaan natin yan? Papaniwalaan niya yung binayaran? Kanya binayaran siya para magsabi yan? Paano natin mawala hindi siya binayaran? Ang tawag ko dyan, jukebox. Kung ano yung hulog, yun nasasabihin. You must appreciate the fact that I'm a very passionate individual. But I also have my duty, if only my own individual duty. I don't impose it upon my fellow senators in all my respect. And I would like to see a Senate that is protected, a Senate whose integrity is not solid, a Senate that is not put into shame by this man who claims now he's telling the truth. Mr. President, ano ba ang tawag natin dyan? Araw-araw, don't you think ako hindi nababagabag ang konseso ko? 7,000 tao na ang namamatay? Nasaan ba yung mga abogado natin? Bakit hindi puntahan isa-isa yung mga pinapatay na yan at sabihin sa kanila, oy, nagising na kami sa katalugan namin. Sino pumatay sa'yo? Lalabanan namin yan. Ngabini, Flag, everybody, IBP. Wala. It's called apathy. It's called waiting for the right time. And that is the danger of waiting for the right time. It is never the truth when you wait for the right time because you are inconsistent. Your principles are based on time, not based on the value, not based on the character, on the how you were raised by your parents and by your community. Now, Mr. President, my own father was killed. Benigno Aquino was killed. Many others have been killed. Mama Sapano, my gosh. It really bothers me to this day. Na hanggang ngayon, in fact, I'm being asked by the Mama Sapano policemen and their families to come over. Nahihirapan ako na kung papayagan ko ito at hindi ako magsasalita. Palagi ko, mahirapan ako matulog, mahirapan akong harapin kayong lahat dito, pagpapasok ko, palagi ko mawawalan ako ng gana talaga na pumasok pa. Because parang nawala yung essence ng Senado. Senatus Populusque Romanus. Senate and the people of Rome. That is where we come from, Mr. President. All the senates of the world started from there. But of course, the Senate of the people of Rome were the patricians. The plebeians were not there. Yung masa, wala dyan. I'm beginning to think like we're like Rome. Are we patricians? Hindi natin hahanapin yung dapat natin hanapin? Ngayon, Mr. President, sasabihin natin, politika yan, partisan yan, kalaban yan, kakampiyan, ganito. Magko-caucus pa tayo. Forgive me for saying this. Kahapon pa ako, nahanda mag-privilege speech. Sabi ni Senator Soto, mag-caucus, pumayag ako. Pagdating doon, we were all calm, ayaw natin magsigawan, ayaw natin mag-ayos. That was the purpose of the caucus. Bigla tayo nagbutuhan. Pero hindi pa tayo nakakalabas yung gabi. Tagatawagin na ako. At sinasabi, ito ang mga bumoto laban. Paano nalalaman yan? Sabi ko, narinig ko dun sa lobby, sabi, huwag tayo magbutuhan sa labas. At kaya tayo. You heard that? I heard that. I heard Senator Villar say, gagawa-gawa kayo ng gulo, tapos kami maiipit Mapipilitan kami bumoto I heard Senator Villar say that. I even heard a lot of other things. So, Mr. President, ito ang Senado, yung integridad natin comes first. And tama lang yun. Hindi ko sinabi mali yung sinasabi yan. We have to have caucuses para we can collect our thoughts. We can agree to disagree. Pero, kung ganyan naman ang mangyayari, tatalikuran natin yung salitang oath. I'm sure marami sa inyo nag-Boy Scout. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. Kung nakalimutan niya, and to obey the Scout law. To help other people at all times to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. I address it to all the Boy Scouts, and the Girl Scouts, and the young people. Follow the law. Follow the truth. Now, Mr. President, every president takes his oath. Every senator takes his oath. Every congressman, every mayor, councilor, police, barangay captain, they take their oath. If we do not take that oath seriously, ano klase tayong tao? That's why I keep my oath in my box. Kapag mawalan ako ng argument, sometimes hihilahin ko yan, sabihin ko, we took an oath. Ayan ang mga oaths natin, no? We keep our oaths in our rooms. It's for decoration. We have no culture of oath-taking in this country. It's like we pray every day. We pray for guidance. We pray for justice. Mr. President, kayo na sumagot. Tayo na sumagot. I'm not trying to be holier than thou. A Filipino soldier takes his oath. He will not be cowardly. He will serve the country. A policeman will take his oath to protect and to serve. We all take our oaths. That is the history of oaths. That is why when somebody takes an oath here and violates it, Republic Act under the Revised Penal Code, Article 183, punishes somebody who lies under oath. Ayan, false testimony in other cases. Mababa pa nga ang penalty. Dapat siguro taasan na yan eh. Arresto mayor lang yan. Now, Mr. President, ilan yan? 1 month and 1 day to 6 months. That's why siguro hindi masyadong pinapatulan yan. Okay lang. Huwag na tayo mag-oath. Okay lang. We can forget our oath. We forget it. Tomorrow, they'll forget it. Now, Mr. President, if that's the way we want to raise our children, our country, then we'll say oath becomes cheap. So, Mr. President, when Arthur Las Cañas became a policeman, he took an oath. When he says when he answered upon the question of the senator that brought her, ikaw bang head ng DDS? And he said, no. Dapat nagalit si Senator Lima. Nagsinungaling sa kanya yung kanyang testigo eh. But when he says, the DDS is just media hype, the DDS does not exist. He had nothing to do with the mosque bombing, October 3, 2016. My goodness, Mr. President. Now he says he bombed them. And you want to believe this man? This man who lies frequently, who claims he's paid to murder, he is paid now to talk? Can I ask that question? No, I will not ask that question. I'm sure I will say, you are now paid. That's why you're here. And I don't think you can blame me if I said that. Ako lang ho yun, wag na iba. He was a person that come and lied again. He lied to his family. He lied to his fellow policemen. He lied to his community. He lied to this country. And we want to honor him now, bringing him back here. Let's take it to its logical extreme, Mr. President. He now says, I'm telling the truth. Eto ang nagpapatay dyan. Ano gagawin natin ngayon? Dalhin natin sa ombudsman, dalhin natin sa... I'm sure the first question is, are you telling the truth now? Let's take it to its logical extreme. Hindi ba dadali sa impeachment yan? At pagdating sa impeachment yan, ano mangyayari? Aabot ba yan? We're giving our country false hopes. That is why I was so careful. My statement in the recommendation I made, we find no evidence in this hearing that this is sponsored by the state. You can mock me, you can do everything you want, but that is the truth. There was no evidence presented that showed this. Now, if this man said, eto, meron, then meron tayong pag-uusapan. Eh, hindi niya ginawa eh. Hindi niya ginawa. So, Mr. President, I'm not here to convince you. I'm not here to say, oh, huwag na tayo tawagin yan. Nasa sa inyo na yan, kanya-kanya na yan. But I personally would like to take this off my chest. My wife told me, wag na dik, kaya mo na. My wife was having a high blood episode yesterday. That's why I had to go out. I was really... And when I came over, wag na, sabi niya, wag na natin patuloy niyan, dik. Let us pick our battles. Pick our battles, Mr. President. What battle is that? Hindi ba, it's a battle against ourselves. Hindi ba, it's a battle that when you're called to stand up, you have to say so. You have to stand up and speak for the truth, even if you're going to hurt your party, even if you're going to hurt your friends. You stand up and say, I cannot agree with you. Now, Mr. President, That is me. I am not going to impose it upon anybody. But take time. Tarry a little before we proceed. The next time we invite somebody here, let us make sure we read his oath 20 times. Let him promise 20 times. Because nobody's gonna respect us here. Ay, Senado, madali magsinungaling yan, papatawarin ka. Magpe-press conference pa doon sa Senado mismo. Ano mangyayari sa investigasyon natin? Ano mangyayari sa mga tao na pumupunta rito para humarap ng katarungan? Which sometimes we ourselves cannot even do. You know, Mr. President, I wanted to deliver a speech the other day. A UP student, a UP businessman, o sabihin ko, fraternity brother, was killed in Batangas, murdered in Santo Tomas, Batangas. I wanted to speak, pero ang dami. So what am I gonna do? Andun ho yun sa recommendation namin doon sa Committee on Justice. Anytime there's a murder, you count it, and every month, how many people have been killed in Batangas? And it is reported to the Committee on Justice and Peace and Order and Public Order, and we call Bato or General De La Rosa, and we call the Provincial Director of Batangas and say, 200 deaths in your area, and you're not doing anything about it. Perhaps it's time to change the PNP. Perhaps it's time to change the budget. That is in the recommendation. Every province, para matigil unti-unti, you cannot slay extrajudicial killing. I was still in the previous Senate when I spoke to a senator from Vermont who accosted a senator when I was lobbying for the veterans bill that we got eventually. And he was saying, we cannot give you any money, there's extrajudicial killing. That was how many years ago, Mr. President? More than 10 years ago. Now, Mr. President, you slay it by saying, ay, iyas, hindi ka na pwedeng umiwas. You have 15 days to finish that report. And you report it to us right away. And I'm saying, hindi na pwedeng kabaro ang mag-iimbestiga ng pulis. Ang pulis ang mag-iimbestiga, ang husgado. Dapat mabilis. Mr. President, unbeknownst to you, for the last 3 weeks, I've been sitting down with plebs, trying to figure a way how we can spend that 100 million so that we could have plebs all over the country, in the Metro Manila area, para the people can go to plebs and say, sinaktan ako ng pulis yan, pinatay ako ng pulis yan, and plebs, motu proprio, within 60 days, can say, you're out of the police. You're suspended. And while you're suspended, you cannot, when you appeal, you have no gun, you have no shield. That's the solution, Mr. President. Hindi yung magsisisihan tayo na kumakampi tayo, na partisan tayo rito. You cannot solve that. My father's case has not been terminated. The masterminds remain free. And so does thousands, maybe tens of thousands of others. And now this. A police officer comes in. Hindi ako sinampal, Mr. President. Ang sinampal tayo. If you don't feel that, maybe I'm right. Maybe I will have a hard time trying to get back into the Senate. So, Mr. President, it means a little bit of nobility. We disagree with one another here. You know, we always try, let us be noble at least. Let us try to treat each other with respect and candor so we can find out the truth. Not our anger, but the truth. So, Mr. President, on that note, I have said my piece, and you may judge me. If you want to question me, you may do so. But as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to apologize to my wife, because I'm sure she will be very, very stressed. But I cannot do that. She's not feeling very well. And I said, I'm sorry. I have to follow my conscience and my heart. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gordon. Majority Leader.
Senator Cayetano wishes to seek the floor, Mr. President.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Cayetano is recognized.
President, first of all, may I just salute my colleague, Senator Gordon, and give him a hug.
Lights.
Mr. President, may I just state for the record so we can diffuse the atmosphere, he is not my type, but because he's a senator, I'm willing to be hugged.
No, I know this is a very emotional issue for everyone, and at stake here, Mr. President, is not just the integrity of the Senate. There is obviously a group in the Philippines that want the Senate to be a part of the removal of the President. There's also groups who want to protect the President, and there are, I assume, 24 senators who does not care about removing or keeping the President there, but cares about the truth. And I think that is the speech of the gentleman from Olongapo, no? Who served long and dignified, and I've disagreed with him a lot of times. I've been in that podium and he's been here, but it has always been decent. It has always been in accordance with the rules and the traditions of the Senate. So let me just make this point, Mr. President. I was looking at the journal. So Senator Trillanes moved that it be privileged speech be referred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs. In the onset and in appearance, parang walang problema doon. But alam naman po natin, and during his conference, he said that he will have a manifestation to reopen. So alam na natin na pag sinabing reopen, yung committee na meron original jurisdiction, yun ang magre-reopen. That has been the Senate tradition. That is in our rules. In fact, when a speech has been given, a resolution has been filed, a bill has been filed, there are several here who have been majority leaders, Senator Soto, myself, of course, Senate President Drilon was Senate President for a long time. Senator Miggs, Senator Kiko here was a majority leader. Once it is given to that committee, the only way to release that from the committee is to get a signatures of, if I'm not mistaken, 1/5 of the committee, five committee members, no? 5 committee members. I stand corrected. So this did not happen here, and it might have been oversight. But I could see that Senator Soto was sensitive enough in his manifestation to say, okay, since there are no objections because he has to follow the plenary, we will give it to the Committee on Public Order, but we will inform the Committee on Justice and Human Rights because the issue is related to the report the committee came up with. In fact, that was a very polite way of saying it because it's not only related. It is basically the same thing. The Las Cañas or the speech of Senator Trillanes goes into exactly what the Committee on Justice and Public Order was investigating. So, dun po sa mga baguhan sa Senate at sa mga kababayan natin nakikinig, bakit ginamit ni Senator Dick yung sinampal siya dito? Because po, never natin ginagawa dito sa Senado na alisin ang jurisdiction sa committee mo. And never natin pinagbobotohan yon. I'm sorry, I might not have the moral ascendancy to speak about it that much because I wasn't here yesterday. I was meeting some guests, some diplomats and some foreign investors. But the situation now is we have to ask ourselves, do we want to throw the rule book into the wastebasket? Do we want to take away the traditions of the Senate na kung sino chairman, siya magde-decide? I haven't made up my mind whether or not we should hear it again or not. Part of me wants na, sige, papatindi natin kasi nungalingan naman yun, magigiba naman yung kanyang testimony. But the other part of me is, yung sinabi ni Senator Dick, ba't natin aksayan ng panahon natin? Yung OFWs, yung pensioners, yung senior citizens, you know, some people here keep pointing to the ombudsman. Dapat yung ombudsman. So, why not let Las Cañas go to the ombudsman and do his job? That's what I'm weighing, no? But, I return to the basic principle. We respect the chair. And my chair in the Committee on Justice, that's why it's called our committee. It is not Dick Gordon's committee. It is our Justice Committee. But he is our chair. So why not allow him to make the decision? Now, it's up to you, my dear colleagues, today to make that decision. But if you decide to overrule Senator Dick, I will be here more often, and that is a threat. And why will I be here more often? Because there are a lot of bills that I want to take up. One of them is the ERD, Emergency Response Department. Because ang daming nasusunugan, ang daming binabagyo, and hindi ko tingin na kaya ng NDRRMC, and that is with Senator Trillanes. He has a counterpart bill, so hindi ko naman sasabihin na hindi niya gusto ito. But kung ganyan mangyayari, edi araw-araw, 24 tayong tatayo dito na mag-speech at magmo-motion na yung committee na yon, eto i-take up. And then magko-caucus tayo. Eh bakit pa tayo magko-committee system dito? Buwagin na natin lahat ng committee on the whole na tayo parate, mag-decide na lang tayo dito araw-araw through caucus kung ano uunahin ng Senate. Or, we can go back to the traditions of the Senate, which is, we talk to the chair, and we allow the chair to decide. If we do not have faith in our chairman, let us be honest enough, have the integrity enough, have the courage enough to go up to him and say, Senator Dick, we do not have confidence in you. But wag natin pong sampalin. Kasi hindi natin ginagawa sa Senado yon. Hindi ko tingin na yun ang intensyon. And to be fair to Senator Soto, our Majority Leader, ang balita ko ilang tao na lang nasa floor, wala naman pong nag-object, and I see his wisdom in putting it here. We will inform the Committee on Justice. So now we have heard Senator Dick. I have heard him loud and clear. If he is now saying, I will hear it, I will support him. If he is now saying, I will not hear it, I will support him. Because I have faith and confidence in him. Now may I hear from my colleagues here, do you have faith and confidence in our chairman of the Committee on Justice? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. President. I did not say sampal ito sa akin. Ang nagsabi po niya na si Senator Lacson. It's not personal to me. And I thank Senator Lacson for thinking in that fashion because he may take it that way, but I don't take it that way. I rise and fall on what I do. And I would not think that my colleagues will deliberately, euphemistically slap me in the face. And I'm sure they will be courageous enough to say, I do not agree with this. But a lot of us signed that report, and it's there. And again, I reiterate that we should really act on that. And if you don't want to act on that, I will understand. Senator DeLong said the other day, yesterday, there is newly discovered evidence. Newly discovered evidence has to be studied. And if this is newly discovered evidence from the same source, it has become a polluted source. Because he has lied. Going out in public, invoking God, invoking everybody in public, he's lied. He admitted to it. Mahina nga Secretary of Justice eh. Dapat perjury na yan eh. By the way, I took the case of perjury to Mr. Bulante when I was Blue Ribbon. Unfortunately, the Department of Justice did not move. And that is the problem, Mr. President. We must make decisions. I am able to stand up here. I am not afraid of the opprobrium that I may suffer from all the trolls. I don't make my decision based on trolls or based on what people say. It is just me and my conscience. And if I fail, it is me. I will not blame others that I made the wrong decision. I will only take it upon myself to say, and be man enough to say, I made the wrong decision. But, Mr. President, the fact that I'm here says that I cannot sit quietly by and allow what I call madness, if I may. The stampede, the herd, the popular appeal, the flashes of new lawyers coming in. My gosh, Mr. President, I am called to make that decision. I've already made mine. And if it is going to be referred to me, I will not hear this man. I will recommend to him and advise him. Go to the ombudsman. You have lawyers. Go there. Because hindi ka na namin papaniwalaan dito eh. Ako, at least I speak for myself. I will not believe him. Now, unless there's new evidence, fine. Then, the Senate, in its rightful duty, can refer it again to whatever committee they may see fit. And so far as I'm concerned, Mr. President, From day one, I said, go to court. You miss your chance. You missed the boat. You were privileged to come here. Nobody poked a gun at you. We listened to you intently. You even went against Matubato. And now this. So, Mr. President, I will leave it at that. I just wanted to unburden myself here. I don't want to bear any ill will upon my peers here. I'm in the last quarter, if you will, of my life, and that's being ambitious. I've seen many, many days here in the past. I've seen the rise and fall of leaders. I've seen our country sometimes go up and then go down. Turn another route instead of going to development and progress. Mr. President, I'm not going to change. I'm not ready to change. I will always stand up if I feel I need to stand up. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there are many options for the Senate at this point, and I will move for one of the options. I move that the speech of Senator Gordon and the interpellation of Senator Cayetano be referred to the Committee on Rules, and we will study further how to address these points that they raised. We'll take special note of the manifestations, Mr. President. So move.
Any objection?
Mr. President.
Senator
Mr.
Cayetano.
President, may I just add to that referral a point of order that can also be referred to the Committee on Rules? That the proper procedure was to give it back to the Committee on Justice. Now that it has been clarified that the substance and the topic is the same investigation that was with the Justice Committee. Again, I'm not making a decision now, but throwing it to the Committee on Rules. And thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator Gordon.
there's a statement. I would just like to thank the Majority Floor Leader. Far be it from my mind to say that it should be referred to any committee. Like I said, I just want to unburden myself here. I want to be able to come here and be able to look everybody in the eye and say, you're my friend, and I trust you. And that you are for my country and you're for our country.
Yes, I agree, but Mr. President, the points that were raised are very valid. And I think the
You want to study
Committee on
them?
Rules should look into these matters.
I bow to the
closely.
wisdom of the Majority Floor Leader, Mr. President.
Senator Trillanes,
Thank you,
it's
Mr.
a
President.
pleasure, Senator Trillanes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Is it connected to the motion?
I just need to state for the record regarding the statement of Senator Cayetano that there was no agreement that the subject matter of this privilege speech I made last Monday was the same and covered by the subject matter that was heard by the Committee on Justice. I maintain that those are two separate subjects and that justifies the referral to the Committee on Public Order.
Mr. President, may I call for the previous question?
The motion has been made by the Majority Leader to refer the privileged speech of Senator Gordon and the interpellation thereon of Senator Cayetano to the Committee on Rules. Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President,
Senator Cayetano?
I apologize to Senator Trillanes if I made it appear that there's a consensus. What I meant is that it seems obvious to me, and I thought it was obvious to everyone, that it's the same. But we have to defer to each other and decide collectively. So precisely, let's give it to the Committee on Rules to decide. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, yung sinabi ko naman sampal po kay Senator Dick, I was talking about sampal sa ating committee system and not to one senator. So I hope that we can seriously consider the implications if we're going to take another route. Thank you, Mr. President.
It's a pleasure, Senator Poe.
Mr. President, thank you. I would like to thank Senator Gordon for his manifestation. Yes, Senator Gordon usually delivers a speech, talagang malaman, madamdamin. I would like to address the following points, though, that I've realized during his speech. Number one, I think he mentioned that we shouldn't allow this person to come over here and lie again to us because we should not give this person the benefit of doing so. I would just like to give out my own opinion about this. Making him come here to speak is not for the benefit of this person. I believe that making him come here to speak is also for the benefit of those of us who would like to know what made him change his mind and why is he doing so. Mr. President, I think that if we were to judge based on the statements of the other resource persons that came here, and we would reject them for having lied in the past, I think that we will hardly have any resource persons left to come here. There are certain self-preservations that obviously these individuals might have had when they first came over here to speak. On the other hand, I would like to thank Senator Gordon for being upfront about it. Senator Ping and I were discussing, at least he was truthful in saying that he was not going to hear it, that he thought it was a waste of time, because what he could do as chairman of the committee, just to say, yes, it can be referred to my committee, but I will sit on it and I will do nothing. But then he said, if it's referred to my committee, I think it's a waste of time and I will not hear it. So thank you for clarifying that. On the other hand, also, Mr. President, Senator Ping, I'm sorry to my seatmate, but I think that this is a very laudable reason also for him. He's uncomfortable in breaking the collegiality between us by accepting the referral to his committee, although I think that he's a very capable chairman of public order, and he could hear this fairly. I can understand his predicament. So, Mr. President, most of you are lawyers here, but we have Section 14, Rule 10 of the Senate Rules, which reads, whenever necessary, special committees shall be organized, the membership and jurisdiction of which can be determined or shall be determined by the Senate President. Proceeding from this, and considering that the Justice Committee Chair has expressed his objection to reopen the hearing on the EJK, and if in the case the Public Order Committee is not likewise inclined to do so, may I then manifest that there may be a necessity that a special committee be organized for this purpose, given the following. Number one, the allegations of Mr. Las Canas are serious and appears to corroborate the testimonies of Mr. Matobato. The Senate should be given an opportunity to test his credibility. It doesn't mean he's telling the truth already by him coming out in the open right now, or the truthfulness of his allegations in the interest of the public. Number two, Mr. Las Canas may have perjured himself by making allegations that are diametrically opposed to what he had previously given under oath before the Justice Committee. This opportunity that we will give ourselves to hear and scrutinize his allegations before a special committee that may be organized would definitely not absolve Mr. Las Canas for any criminal act that he may have already committed. Mr. President, you were with me in 2004 when no one would hear us about all of the fraud allegations of that time during the elections. You were also with us during the hearings against the fertilizer fund scam, when the Blue Ribbon Committee refused to hear it, and it was the Committee on Agriculture that had to assume that responsibility. I feel that even if we have other venues like the Ombudsman and the courts, it's always the Senate that is the last bastion for the public to be able to hear all of the testimonies without limit. And so I appeal to my colleagues. We may have our inclinations and political affiliations, but this is not for anyone. This is really to preserve also what the Senate has done in the past, and that is a forum for the public to hear the issues that are going on. Now, with regards to Mama Sapano, it was mentioned that We didn't even have a committee report. But Mr. It has not been approved. We have a committee report. It's not been voted on. But Mr. President, what we have suggested are recommendations on the charges to be filed against those individuals were carried on by the Ombudsman. Usurpation of power, etc. And so with that, Mr. President, I thank you for this opportunity.
I have not given up my position.
Senator Gordon?
I thank the manifestation of the gentle lady, but let me just be clear again. Maybe I must have been misunderstood. The point here is not just his lying. The point here is the dignity of the Senate, the respect that the Senate must be given, because, as she said, reiterating what I previously said, this is the bastion on which the people can go to. No one should be allowed to trifle with the Senate insofar as the truth is concerned. No one must take an oath here and then say later on, I want to do it again. He missed his boat. He lied to the Senate. The only reason why I give them that option about being able to go to the Ombudsman or to anyone, because those are indeed options. And again, if we don't do anything about it, I fear that all the others who are conducting investigations may not have that kind of suasion upon witnesses that they can easily be trifled with. You've seen me, Mr. President, when you have witnesses who are former police officers who try to trifle with the committee, I put them in their place. At least I thought I did, Mr. President. When lawyers come in and lie to their teeth, see if they lie, we're able to interpolate them. Just to give you an example, those two lawyers from a Catholic school that I respect comes down here, appointed to one of the highest positions, if not a very respectable position. And they come here and make us believe, under oath, oh, we were just going to go there and preserve the evidence and to try and entrap somebody who was in another place. They were there for 8 to 9 hours. Nobody believed them. And we wrecked their testimony. See, that's what the Senate affords all of us. We can tear down the testimony. That is the opportunity for us. That's why everybody should attend the hearings. Because, like that guy, he says, oh, I got the bag. I did not touch it. But he made his brother touch it. Nakikita na sa video, nagsisinungaling pa. That is what we have gone down to, Mr. President. Or that other gentleman, I still consider him a gentleman because he has not been judged yet, an officer, former officer, general officer of that. He comes in and says, got 18 million, I did not count it, I just brought it home. My gosh, Mr. President, that is where we try to destroy the testimony and prove that there was lying. I thought that we had built the case for the Ombudsman already on those cases, Mr. President. But in this particular case, we were not even given a chance. We did not bring this witness in. Again, I reiterate, he came in on his own volition, on the invitation of the senator from Bicol. And he came, he lied to her. He lied to all of us. And to come down now and say, please, second chance. No, you've already stained the dignity of the Senate, and we don't want that dignity, that respect that must be accorded this body to all 24 constituting the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines. It must be. We're talking about a forum here, Mr. President. Indeed, this is a forum, but not a forum upon which people can perorate and create publicity at the expense of others after they have lied. They will come here and get the forum. He can get the forum. He got the forum the other day. I was surprised that we let him use that. That's reserved for senators. Maybe it was under the control of one senator. That's fine. But, Mr. President, if we say that this is the forum on which people complain that they have been killed, and we act. Their relatives come to us. This is a forum upon which people complain that they're being given the runaround by this particular. That's why we create a Blue Ribbon Committee. That's why we act fast, Mr. President. And that's why, you know, the question that I really dread all the time from the media is how many more hearings are you going to have? When is the last hearing? It's so hard to answer that. Mr. President, kung pag-uusapan lang ang publicity rito, ako matako lamang sa publicity, i-hear natin uli. Pakinggan natin uli at sigurado lahat ng TV na andyan. Ano nakita natin? Taken to its logical extreme, di ganun rin. Hindi rin paniniwalaan yan, tatanungin rin siya, ano ba, totoo ano ba sinasabi mo? I-impeach ba natin? O ano gagawin natin? He can do that in another. He's got adequate lawyers, Mr. President. They claim they're very good lawyers, and I know they are. I know them. But this is not the forum for that. This is not a forum for grandstanding and trying to get things done. This is a place where we get things done. So with all due respect to my colleague, whom I stood up with during the campaign, and she knows that. Never abandoned her. And I was honest to the President of the Philippines. I voted for her. Hindi ako lumilipat. And I told her I belong to Bagong Bayan. I'm not going to join your party. And I can see her nodding. I'm always upfront, Mr. President. I can handle it. But I have to stand up. This is not the proper forum for this man who has lied, who has killed, who murdered his own brothers, Cain the second and Cain the third. Pinatay niya kapatid niya. Bibigyan niya ng forum yan? Excuse me. Pardon me. I know I always give people second chances, Mr. President, but hey, this is stretching it, Mr. President. Thank you.
Was Senator Pacquiao raising his hand earlier? Pacquiao?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm about to say something, Mr. President, that the dignity of the Senate is very important, Mr. President. Kasi kung pagbibigyan natin yan, Mr. President, it's gonna be the basis, no, the basis na magiging argument dito sa Senado sa mga darating pang mga investigation, that a witness can lie and change his testimony. And we don't want that, Mr. President. Hindi natin papayagan yan dahil magiging basis yan. And we know, and I know that the lawyers are here. There's so many lawyers here, and our colleagues. They know that it's gonna be the basis in the further discussion or cases in the situation like that, Mr. President, na bibigyan natin ng ganyang pagkakataon. Hindi na hanggang sa to the next generation, Mr. President, ganyan na maging basis. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lacson is recognized.
First, I'd like to thank the distinguished lady from Pangasinan and Iloilo for her manifestation. But however, lest it be misunderstood that I'm shirking from the responsibility of hearing the privileged speech or this issue, that is far from the truth, Mr. President. It is a mandate, no? Having been referred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, which I chair. It's not I'm willing, no, but it is a mandate, and it is my obligation to hear it. But I will yield to the wisdom of the body, and I do not object to the manifestation of Senator Poe if a special committee will be created for the purpose. I would just like to clarify that, and I would just like to preserve the sensibility of the issue, and I'm sensitive to, of course, I want to be courteous and respectful to Senator Gordon, being the chairman of the Justice Committee, which originally heard this issue. And I agree with Senator Cayetano that this is the same issue, DDS. But since it was referred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, I feel that it is my obligation, having been given the mandate, to act on referrals to that particular committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just wanted to manifest that in the face of lying by witnesses, the Senate is not powerless. In fact, we have exercised our powers as a Senate to punish in the past witnesses who have lied, who have shown contemptible behavior. When I was chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee in 2012, Mr. President, a witness refused to answer the simple question on the issue of rice smuggling, who his financier was. And because he refused to answer the basic question of who his financier was, we held him in contempt, Mr. President, and he was here. He was detained here for almost 2 months. So we are not powerless, Mr. President. In the case of Mr. Las Cañas, if it is the pleasure of the body that he is punished, then we can do so to send a strong signal that the Senate will not allow itself to be lied to. For the record, Mr. President.
What's the pleasure of Senator Pacquiao?
Mr. President, for the record, Mr. President, for this manifestation, yes, we have the power to contempt any witnesses, Mr. President, if telling the lie. But, Mr. President, we are talking about the dignity of the Senate. The dignity of the Senate, Mr. President, because that's the most important thing. Ang problema kasi dito, Mr. President, na magiging basis na yan ng witness. Kung ako witness, pwede na ako magsinungaling dahil pwede naman palang magbago ng statement kailangan ipakita natin yung na tayo dito sa Senado, wag nating paglaruan yung posisyon natin as a senator. Ipakita natin yung tinatawag natin dignity ng Senado, especially yung mga task na yung mga designated committees ng bawat isa. Dapat ipakita natin at respetuhin din natin yung committee report ng chairman ng committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay. Senator Gordon.
Again, it's as if the issue is punishment or sanctions. Senator Pacquiao is correct. We cannot allow our Senate to be the cockpit of lies, the cockpit of, barefaced disrespect. I have also arrested people who lied in the committee, Mr. President. I already arrested people who refused to be subpoenaed, and we picked them up. So it's not just a question of just telling them that, hey, you'll be punished. We really have to make sure that the message is clear. You do not lie anywhere. Thou shalt not lie anywhere, especially in the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines. Give it the respect that it is due.
Mr. President, I agree.
Senator Pangilinan.
I agree, Mr. President, that we should not lie, and that's precisely why we want to know the truth. Mr. President, if we stop at condemning because the person lied, I think we should not stop at condemning this individual because he lied. I think we should proceed and find out the truth. And that is precisely the role of the Senate as a check and balance for other branches of this government. We're interested in the truth, Mr. President, for the record. Mr. President.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
I was asking Senator Gordon, ano legislation? Thou shall not lie? I'm kidding, Mr. President.
There's already a perjury, Your Honor. We can amend that and even make it even stronger.
I was joking, Mr. President.
I know. I
was
always take you
even
seriously,
tempted.
even if you're joking.
I'm even tempted to give a name to the committee that Senator Po is no, hindi maganda pakinggan yung Committee on Lies. Committee on Fabulists.
But
Mr. President,
before we leave the subject matter, Majority Leader,
oo nga.
Given the manifestation of Senator Lacson, the chair believes that there is no necessity to invoke Section 14. Hence, I will not be forming any special committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would just like to thank Senator Po then for giving a preview of what the Rules Committee will be taking up. Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Secretary, let's
Bills on first reading.
okay.
1339, an act right-sizing the national government to improve public service delivery, Senator Honasan II.
Referred to the Committees on Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
1340, an act prohibiting the imposition of expiry dates on gift checks by issuers and for other purposes, Senator Sobiri.
To the Committee on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship.
1341, an act creating the Cooperative Development Commission, repealing for the purpose Republic Act Number 6939, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Cooperative, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, Ways and Means and Finance.
1342, an act amending Republic Act Number 7743, otherwise known as an act providing for the establishment of congressional, city, and municipal libraries and barangay reading center throughout the Philippines and for other purposes, Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Local Government and Finance.
1343, an act creating an advanced studies development program for exceptional employees from the government and the private sector and for other purposes, Senator Sani Angara.
The Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
1344, an act promoting the scientific propagation, processing, utilization, and development of Philippine native animals, hereby creating the Philippine Native Animal Development Center, Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
1345, an act redefining the mandate of the Public Attorney's Office, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 9046 and pertinent provisions of Executive Order Number 292, otherwise known as the Administrative Code of 1987 as amended, and for other purposes, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation.
1346, an act to protect the independence of our judicial system, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Ways and Means and Finance.
1347, an act granting hazard pay to justice sector officials and appropriating funds, therefore, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Ways and Means and Finance.
1348, an act to promote positive, nonviolent discipline of children, prohibiting all forms of corporal punishment, humiliating and degrading treatment, providing penalty, therefore, and appropriating funds, and for other purposes, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations and Gender Equality, Youth and Finance.
Resolutions, number 297, a resolution directing the Senate Committee on Education, Arts, and Culture to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the safety guidelines and policies on educational tours and field trips of colleges and higher education institutions, Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture.
298, resolution directing the appropriate Senate Committee to inquire and review in aid of legislation the four-piece cash for rice subsidy program of the SWD, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development.
299, resolution directing the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development to inquire and review in aid of legislation the implementation of the scholarship programs in agriculture of the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and Education, Arts and Culture.
300, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent killings of lawyers with the end in view of enacting measures to secure the safety and welfare of the members of the Philippine Bar, Senator Laila de Lima.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Justice and Human Rights.
Communications, a letter from Secretary Salvador Mijaldia, dated 22 December 2016, transmitting to Congress through the Senate Republic Act number 10924 or the fiscal year 2017 General Appropriations Act and the President's Budget Action Message.
To the Archives.
Letter from the Office of the President of the Philippines, transmitting to the Senate the revised Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program, first quarter report, and the approved first and second lists of project for phase 1 of the RAFP-MP pursuant to Section 3 of Republic Act number 7898 as amended by Republic Act 10349.
To the Committee on National Defense and Security.
Letter from the Public-Private Partnership Centers submitting to the Senate a copy of the signed concession agreement for the ISLEX Connector Road Project, including all its annexes, executed by the Department of Public Works and Highways as the grantor, and the Manila North Tollways Corporation as the concessionaire, on November 23, 2016, in compliance with the revised implementing rules and regulations of Republic Act number 6957, as amended by Republic Act number 7718, otherwise known as the amended Build, Operate, and Transfer Law.
To the Committee on Public Works. Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, earlier the Senate Bill 1336 was referred to the Committee on Public Services. This is a bill introduced by Senator Zubiri. And with the agreement that Senator Poe was informed and agreed, Senator Zubiri wishes that this Senate bill be referred to the Committee on Trade likewise as primary committee. So I move to change referral from the Committee on Public Services to the Committee on Trade primarily and secondarily to the Committee on Public Services.
What is the Senate bill involved?
1336, Mr. President.
So the motion.
The act to take airline passenger rights.
Okay, the motion is for the, Senate Bill number 1336 about the airline passenger rights to be primarily referred to the Committee on Trade and secondarily to the Committee on Public Services. Any objection? There being no, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two more. Upon the request of Senator Poe and with the consent of the Chamber, after getting the approval of the concerned committee chairs, we move that the referral of Senate Bill 1123 or the PNP Educational Bill be transferred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs from the Committee on Public Order to the Committee on Civil Service and Professional Regulations, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the referral of Senate Bill number 1123 is transferred to the Committee on Civil Service.
Mr. President, the journal for yesterday, number 65, is now ready. So I move that we defer with the reading, dispense with the reading and approve
Consider the same.
journal of number 65 of yesterday, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There being none, we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 65th session of February 21, 2017 and consider the same as approved.
With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1280 under Committee Report number 22.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure amending the Corporation Code of the Philippines. Parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. So I move to recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Vision of Codes and Laws, Senator Frank Rilon, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Ralph Recto.
Can we,
Can we ask for a 1-minute
Yes, sir.
suspension to allow Senator Recto to come to the hall?
yes, a minute suspend?
Senator Recto is here, Mr. Bell.
Okay, so no, okay, so Senator Drilon, as the sponsor is recognized and the minority leader, Senator Recto is recognized to interpellate.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. With my former Senate President, yield to a few questions from his deputy.
With, it will be my honor to respond to the questions of our learned minority leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Sponsor, first of all, let me commend the sponsor of this measure. It is a very important piece of legislation, and I support many of the provisions, especially the creation of one-person corporations, among others, Mr. President. Having said that, Mr. President, and to the distinguished sponsor, the main purpose of my interpellation is to ensure that the constitutional provision on Filipino equity, participation in corporations is faithfully implemented through this proposed measure, and Congress is now presented with the opportunity to define once and for all the term capital, as referred to but still undefined in our Constitution and statutes when used in determining the ownership of a corporation. Also, we are cognizant of the constitutional recognition on the role of the private sector. And for this purpose, we must encourage, through this bill, private sector participation in the development of the national economy by enhancing the ease of doing business and minimizing government intervention, SEC discretion, and regulation in business affairs. Mr. President, it is the policy of the state, as enshrined in the 1987 Constitution, to develop a self-reliant and independent national economy, effectively controlled by Filipinos. But the state recognizes also the important role of the private sector in the development of the nation's economy. Section 19 and 20, Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies of the Constitution. Section 19, the state shall develop a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. Section 20, the state recognizes the indispensable role of the private sector, encourages private enterprise, and provides incentives to needed investments. With this in mind, Mr. President, allow me to proceed with my question to the distinguished sponsor. Mr. President, for the purpose of determining the controlling interest in a corporation, what is the definition of the term capital?
The Supreme Court has decided in two cases on, in effect, the definition of capital, insofar as the nationality requirement in corporations engaged in public service. These are the cases of Gamboa and the case of Roy versus Herbosa. In these two cases, in the first case, the Supreme Court ruled that in the Gamboa decision, the court opined that the full beneficial ownership of 60% of the outstanding capital stock and 60% of the voting rights is required for purposes of complying with the constitutional mandate that the corporation should have at least 60% equity held by Filipinos. This was a very difficult decision. I mean, this was a precedent-setting decision, and it caused a lot of debates. Subsequently, there was another decision in the case of Roy versus Herbosa, the respondent being the present commissioner, chairman, and the Roy versus Mendoza doctrine provided that, again reiterated the rule that for purposes of control, the whole, the total number of outstanding shares of stock entitled to vote in the election of directors and the total number of outstanding shares of stock, whether or not entitled to vote in the election, must be taken into account in determining capital. Now, Mr. President, these are interpretations of the Supreme Court on the issue of control and capital.
Correct.
The present draft committee report that we have submitted to the chamber provides under Section 65, amending Section 140 of the Corporation Code by saying that the Commission shall determine the nationality of a corporation based on the outstanding capital stock entitled to vote in accordance with the Constitution, jurisprudence, and applicable law. The present text, Mr. President, of our committee report, the present text of Senate Bill number 1280 is to codify the majority decision in Roy versus Herbosa. At the appropriate time, we will amend this section 140 so that we will not codify anything. We will leave the matter of the interpretation of what is capital as found in the Constitution to the Supreme Court, because admittedly this present wording that you are submitting codifies the ruling of the Supreme Court in both the Gamboa and Roy decisions. I think the better tack to follow is that we just delete any reference to the decisions and just leave the matter to jurisprudence, because the interpretation of the Supreme Court can change. We repeat, the Supreme Court interpreted the constitutional provision, the nationality requirement under the Constitution, which requires under Article 12, Section 11, that public utility companies should be owned by at least 60% of Filipino citizens. We do not want to codify that, because this is an interpretation of the Supreme Court on the Constitution. This is not a policy issue. So therefore, we leave it to jurisprudence and the Supreme Court to continuously to interpret this provision and not codify it in our measure. Because otherwise, if the Supreme Court changes its mind and we have codified the decision in the present law, we will have problems later on.
Yes. Thank you for that response, Mr. President. And that's precisely the point that I'm trying to drive at here, Mr. President. And that's why my first question, yes, I am familiar with all the Supreme Court rulings, and I've read them. And they have changed over time,
Yes.
as far as the singular case is concerned. And I've read also the dissenting opinions. And I saw it in this corporation code. And precisely why my first question is, or was earlier, did we define capital in this amendment to the corporation code? In fact, we have not, but the gentleman is correct. By way of the wording, it in effect institutionalizes the majority decision of the Supreme Court. My personal opinion is that we should define it in this law and not even amend it to allow the future Supreme Court to keep on changing its definition on capital. That is a personal opinion I have, Mr. President. Now, let me explain why. There are many issues at hand here, Mr. President.
Just if you will allow me, Mr. President, just to respond to that.
Yes.
if we codify, we are codifying an interpretation of the Supreme Court on the meaning of 60% control in terms of the capital. This is not, I would repeat, a policy pronouncement of the Supreme Court. This is an interpretation of the Constitution. As you and I know, Mr. President, the Supreme Court changes its interpretation.
Correct.
If we codify, in effect, the majority decision in Roy versus Herbosa, and the Supreme Court changes its mind on how they interpret the Constitution, then we'll have problems with the codified.
Precisely my point, Mr. President. What I'm saying here is that why not define capital in the corporation code so that it will be easier for us to determine sino ba talaga ang may-ari ng mga corporations, halimbawa, in keeping with the mandate of the constitutional restrictions. Okay? Having said that,
Mr. President.
and precisely why I asked, are we defining capital here? And apparently, the gentleman saying, let's not define it.
Let the Supreme Court define it because this is an interpretation of the Constitution.
Now,
That is why.
my second question, Mr. President, is
sorry.
that, is there any law in our statute books that define capital?
I am not aware of any, and the definition that the decision of the Supreme Court, I would repeat, is on their interpretation of how the 60%
Correct.
capital of equity should be determined.
Precisely. And that is my point, Mr. President. Because Congress has failed to define capital, the Supreme Court defined capital as word in the Constitution by themselves. Now, because of that decision, that is jurisprudence. That becomes the law of the land. Now, nothing prevents Congress. We are equal branches of government. The Supreme Court is not supreme over Congress. Meaning to say, our job is to legislate. Their job is to interpret.
Yes.
And that's why I am saying that we have the opportunity to define capital consistent with our own understanding and reading for the purpose of all these sections laid down in the Constitution. Now, let me proceed, Mr. President, with the permission of the
Just to
sponsor.
comment
Yes.
on that point. Well, yes, Mr. President, we have failed to define the meaning of the word capital. But precisely in this particular instance, it is the interpretation of the word capital in the Constitution by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court's interpretation is superior to any legislation interpreting the Constitution, because
Yes.
under the Constitution,
I understand, Mr. President.
it is the Supreme Court to
Yeah.
interpret.
But remember, Mr. President, even the gentleman said that the Supreme Court can change its mind later on. Nothing prevents Congress from trying to define capital through legislation. And let it be. I'm saying that we have an opportunity here to define capital based on the mandate of the Constitution that says certain industries should be left to Filipinos. Now, I will tell you, and I will explain further on, halimbawa, why that majority decision may not be to our interests as defined by the Constitution.
As interpreted by the
Yes, Mr. President.
Sorry?
Now, I will explain as we go along at the appropriate time why that decision, there is a dissenting opinion of Carpio.
Yes.
And maybe I should go straight to the point. But before I do that, let's take a look at what the Constitution says. Section 2, 10, and 11, Article 12 of the Constitution. Section 2. All lands of the public domain, waters, minerals, coal, petroleum, and other mineral oils, all sources of potential energy, fisheries, forests, or timber, wildlife, flora, and fauna, and other natural resources are owned by the state.
with the exception of agricultural lands, all other natural resources shall not be alienated. The exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources shall be under the full control and supervision of the state. The state may directly undertake such activities, or it may enter into co-production, joint venture, or production sharing agreements with Filipino citizens or corporations or associations, at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens. Owned by such citizens. Such agreements may be, and that continues, Mr. President, owned. So we're looking at ownership. Okay? Section 10. The Congress shall, upon recommendation of the Economic and Planning Agency, when the national interest dictates, reserves to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations or associations at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens, or such higher percentage, hindi lower, higher percentage as Congress may prescribe certain areas of investment. The Congress shall enact measures that will encourage the formation and operation of enterprises whose capital is wholly owned by Filipinos. Okay? It goes on, in the grant of rights, privileges, and concessions covering the national economy and patrimony, the state shall give preference to qualified Filipinos. The state shall regulate and exercise authority over foreign investments within its national jurisdiction and in accordance with its national goals and priorities. I suppose when the Constitution here says the state shall regulate and exercise authority, this could be referring to Congress and the SEC, because precisely why it is in the Corporation Code, who determines whether a corporation is Filipino or not, is based on the ownership structure. And I will get to that, Mr. President. That is one of the powers of the SEC. Now, Section 11. No franchise, certificate, or any other form of authorization for the operation of a public utility shall be granted except to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations or associations organized under the laws of the Philippines, at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens. It goes on and on. Mr. President, the last sentence in this paragraph is also important. The state shall encourage equity participation in public utilities by the general public. Referring to general public, Filipino citizens. It's also in Section 4, Article 14, on educational institutions. The same thing applies. In Section 11, Article 16, ownership and management of mass media, so on and so forth. Advertising, so on and so forth. Now, Mr. President. And that's why I am saying that it is important for us, it is an opportunity for Congress to define capital. Now, we can go to the heart of that Supreme Court decision. And I'm not against that decision because Congress failed to legislate a law. Walang batas eh. Nothing prevents Congress from weighing in on the issue. Now, that decision will stand. By amending the Corporation Code, hindi mare-reverse yung decision na yun. That will stand. This will be prospective, Mr. President.
With the permission of the gentleman,
Yes.
I beg to disagree. The moment we define what is capital and we redefine what is the voting required, that is something that could raise questions because the Supreme Court has interpreted this provision of the Constitution. Now, again, I would emphasize that our view is that this is an interpretation of the Constitution which the Supreme Court has superior authority under our Constitution to interpret. I do not believe, and this is a personal belief, that we can provide in the proposal a manner of defining capital which the Supreme Court may not agree with, because that definition is not consistent with the Constitution.
Mr. President, my job is to put this on record in the Senate.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why I'm taking this issue up, Mr. President.
That is, yeah, okay.
Now, let me illustrate, Mr. President,
Go ahead.
why that is. Does the Corporation Code or in this bill or any other existing law provide a formula to determine the 60-40 ownership in favor of Filipino citizens?
The question is there anything in this
Yes.
proposal, in this bill or
How
any
do
other
we
law
define 60-40
which,
now?
which defines 60-40?
Now, based on, so let's go to the Supreme Court ruling, Mr. President. Okay?
Huh? Well, in answer to that, Mr. President, the SEC Memorandum Circular Number 8, they defined what is the nationality requirement, which must be applied to the total number of outstanding shares of stock
Correct.
entitled to vote, and or coupled with the total number of outstanding shares of stock, whether or not entitled to vote in the election
Yes.
of directors.
And that was used in effect as basis for the Supreme Court decision.
No, this is the result, if I... this was affirmed in the ruling
Correct.
of Roy.
Correct. A regulation of the SEC found to be correct by the Supreme Court.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, now,
The interpretation of the SEC
Correct.
found to be correct by the Supreme Court.
Correct. Nothing prevents Congress from defining it as well. If the SEC can define it, and the Supreme Court agreed with them then, nothing prevents Congress from defining it as well. Now, let me continue, Mr. President. The absurdity of this position. Why is this position absurd? As far as my mind and the minority is concerned. To illustrate, XYZ Corporation, a public utility corporation, issued 100 common shares, 100 voting preferred shares, 100 non-voting preferred shares. How do we determine whether said corporation complies with the 60-40 requirement?
Can we have that example again?
Okay. A corporation, XYZ, a public utility corporation, issues 100 common shares, 100 voting preferred shares, and 100 non-voting preferred shares. How do we determine whether the said corporation complies with the 60-40 requirement?
In the Gamboa, in the Gamboa ruling, the court opined that the full beneficial ownership of 60% of the outstanding capital stock and coupled with 60% of the voting rights is required in order that we determine whether it is compliant with the constitutional requirement of 60% control.
But that was not the final position, di ba?
Sorry?
That was not the final position.
No, it's fine.
The final position is the shares voting lang.
Yung Gamboa.
Only those voting shares,
Sorry?
only the voting shares and common shares, voting preferred, sama preferred, di ba? Voting, okay? In electing the board are the only determinants if that corporation is
Compliant.
complies with the 60-40.
That is the decision in effect of the Supreme Court, following the SEC regulation. Okay? It could be that the beneficial ownership of the corporation is foreign. It's just for electing the board. Okay? Now, let's move on, Mr. President. How do you determine equity? Capital and equity. Isn't it that capital is equity?
The capital is same as equity. Capital is the same as equity.
It's the same as equity. Now, a common share, is that capital?
A common share, is
Yes.
that capital? Yes.
A preferred voting share, is that capital?
Yes, it is capital.
Okay. A preferred non-voting share, is that capital?
A preferred non-voting share, yes, it is capital.
So all of it is capital.
Yes.
So how come we do not count the preferred non-voting in the definition of capital? In the determination of 60/40? Based on the Gamboa ruling.
Well, the interpretation of the SEC as contained in the memorandum circular is that it is the outstanding shares of stock entitled to vote and the total number of outstanding shares of stock, whether entitled to vote or not, should be considered in determining the 60%.
Yes. Yes. It is only the total number of shares ang sinasabi ng Gamboa ruling. Ng SEC.
No.
Oh, ng SEC.
Ng SEC, yes.
Okay. Now, as far as the Supreme Court ruling is concerned, in fact, I have with me here also the same with the dissenting opinion, for example, of Justice Carpio. Huh? Yeah. Let me use this example. For example, assume that Class A voting shares have a par value of 1 peso and Class B non-voting preferred shares have a par value of 100. If 100 outstanding Class A shares are all owned by Filipinos, citizens, and 80 outstanding Class B shares are owned by foreigners, and 20 Class B shares are owned by Filipino citizens, the 60-40% ownership requirement in favor of Filipino citizens for voting shares, as well as for the total voting and non-voting shares, will be complied with. If dividends are declared equivalent to the par value per share for all classes of shares, only 20.8% of the dividends will go to Filipino citizens, while 79.2% of the dividends will go to foreigners. That is the point. Because hindi kasama sa bilang yung if the par values are different, okay, dun magkakaproblema. And that's why it is better to determine 60-40, all classes of shares, regardless of value, in each class, whether voting or not, should be 60-40. That way you don't have a problem. And that problem even escalates with the grandfather rule. Kung may subsidiary, if in the first instance here, as that example, 28%, 20% na lang ang dividendo ng Pilipino, controlled nga by Filipino sa board. Pero yung beneficial ownership is actually 80% owned by foreigners. Yung kita ng kumpanya, 80% for foreigners, 20% na lang ang Filipino. Now, kung may subsidiary yan, na 60-40 ulit, lalong sasama yung sitwasyon, the beneficial ownership. There is no need to amend the Constitution anymore if we are to follow that Supreme Court ruling later on Hindi ba na kailangan amendan yung economic provisions ng Constitution?
Well, Mr. President,
That is
here,
my reading,
at
as
the,
illustrated, Mr.
Yes.
President. Yes.
there is obviously a divergence of opinion here.
Yes.
And, but, you know, at the appropriate time, the period of amendments, we are willing to look at the proposed amendments of the gentleman and see if we can accommodate it. There are very difficult legal issues.
I understand
involved.
there are difficult
And
issues.
as I said, at the appropriate time, I'm sure the gentleman will have amendments. We will look at it, and for all we know, we can agree or come up with a compromise provision, and that should put the issue to rest. At
Yes.
this point, we are not. We could not come to a common ground. So, I think with spreading the records, our arguments, and at the appropriate time, we're willing to look at any proposed amendment.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Just one more question on this issue to the gentleman, because he is the lawyer and I am not.
But you sound more like a lawyer than anybody else.
Well, coming from my Senate President, I'm, well, thank you very much for the flattery. But having said that, Mr. President, correct me if I am wrong. I do not wish to change the decision of the Supreme Court. That is farthest from my mind. Those cases that have been decided, they should stay. What I'm just saying here is that moving forward prospectively, will that apply if we make the amendments in the Corporation Code defining capital? Okay? And will that just be prospective? May retroactive ba to? Wala naman ata eh.
I will hazard an answer. Since this is an interpretation of the constitutional provision on control, then it could result in a retroactive application. And I'm expressing an opinion here.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. President. Okay. So, moving on, Mr. President, on other issues, Section 14 of the proposed bill, which states, among others, that companies covered by Sections 17.2 of the Securities Regulation Code, such as those whose securities are registered with a commission or listed with an exchange, shall have at least 1/3 of the entire membership of the board as independent directors or trustees. These directors must be elected by a majority of the total number of outstanding shares entitled to vote in the election of directors and majority of minority shareholders. My proposal, Mr. President, is to reduce the required number of independent directors to 2, or 20% thereof, and require only that independent directors be elected as such by the majority of the shareholders present or entitled to vote in absentia during the stockholders' meeting, regardless of whether they are part of the majority or minority bloc.
We have no problems if that is proposed.
At the appropriate time.
At the appropriate time, we can review it and
Yes.
consider it favorably.
Yes. I will not explain any more the importance of that, Mr. President. Another item on Section 17, which gives the Commission the power to order the holding of an election for directors or trustees of a corporation in the event that no such election is held. In such case, any number of shares represented in such meeting and entitled to vote shall constitute a quorum, even if it fails below the threshold provided under the bylaws of the corporation.
I'm sorry, what section is that?
Section 17.
Section 70 of the
17.
bill. Huh?
17.
17.
17.
Section 17. Section 15.
My proposal, Mr. President, is that maintain that at least a majority of the outstanding capital stock or such other percentage prescribed in the bylaws of the corporation should be represented in the said meeting in order for the said elections to be valid. Yun ang marami dito ang provisions na masyadong pinakikialaman din ng SEC, ha? May deemed quorum sila dyan. So. And the problem there is that it'll be unfair to majority stockholders who would have to bear the brunt of any financial impact made by decision of the minority elected board, and who may eventually decide to simply divest themselves of their stake in the said corporation, leaving the same without sufficient capital. So at the appropriate time, we probably can make amendments here.
Yeah, we will look at the amendments.
Yes, sir. And then there is Section 28 of the proposed bill, which requires approval of the Board of Directors for any sale, lease, exchange, mortgage, pledge, or disposition of corporate property and assets.
Section
Section 28.
20.
Na kailangan lahat ito dadaan sa board.
Okay.
This requirement may unduly hamper corporate operations, as contracts involving properties or assets of even small value will now have to be elevated to the Board of Directors, when such matters are often delegated to management. Our suggestion is to leave this matter to the decision of stockholders, who may include any parameters for the delegation of such authority in the corporation's bylaws.
Yes, so we can look at that at the appropriate time, Mr. President.
Yes.
This is not critical, yeah.
Okay. Section 33.
Section
33.
33.
Which requires the board to endeavor to present to the stockholders at the regular stockholders meeting the compensation benefits of employees who are immediate family members of a director, trustee, or an officer of the corporation, or whose employment was made with their endorsement. I could understand this for publicly listed companies. But if you're not publicly listed, and it's just a family corporation, there is no public interest, bakit makikialam pa?
Yeah, okay. Yes, we will consider favorably an amendment at the appropriate time.
Yes. Thank you. Section 40 requires a corporation...
Can we have the page, sir?
What page is it? Section 40 requires a corporation to give stockholders unlimited access to a host of information pertaining to the corporation.
This is the right of inspection.
Page 35.
Page 35.
Section 40.
Huh? Section 40. Section 40 of the code. Not,
No, of SB 1280.
It's page 53.
Page
53
Section 40
of the bill.
of the bill, yeah.
section 50.
Our proposal is to amend the section to accept information that may be classified by the corporation as confidential from the blanket inspection rights of stockholders.
Confidentiality. Yeah. Yes,
Na pwedeng gamitin for insider trading yan eh.
again, we have no basic objection to that. We can, once we see the proposed amendment, we can accept it.
Section 55, which states that if a corporation is dissolved by the SEC pursuant to the grounds set forth in this section, its assets, after payment of liabilities, shall be forfeited in favor of the national government upon petition of the Commission with the appropriate court. My proposal, Mr. President, is to strike out this concept of forfeiture, or in the alternative, allow the stockholders who had no participation in the illegal or prohibited acts to recover their investments.
Okay. Yes, again, we can consider that, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Section 68.
Section 68, can the gentleman make it, when it refers to Section 68, Section 68 of the Corporation Code, or Section 68 of the bill?
Of the bill.
Of the bill. Section 68 of the bill.
The last paragraph of Section 143, as amended by Section 68 of the proposed bill, states that no court below the Court of Appeals shall have jurisdiction to issue a restraining order, preliminary injunction, or preliminary mandatory injunction in any case, dispute, or controversy that directly or indirectly interferes with the duties and responsibilities of the Commission. I think we're better off if we leave it to the RTC as currently.
To the
I think
RTC?
today it's with the RTC.
Well, I don't know if we're better off. I think, you know, in the hierarchy of the levels of the adjudicatory agencies, I don't think we can equate the SEC with the RTC. That's why we have provided for this.
So, but that
In
limits...
other words, are we saying, Mr. President, is the gentleman proposing that an RTC can issue?
No, today, what is it? It is not the Court of Appeals.
The CA, no.
It is today.
Yes, yes, today.
So why are we amending it if it is the CA today?
Are we?
Di ba?
Their decisions available to CA that anybody can issue here.
Can you come closer? That's where you...
Because such requirement may have the effect of depriving corporations of the right to obtain a legal and legitimate relief from the RTC while its main action is pending. To illustrate, the petition for declaratory relief under Rule 63 of the Rules of Court may only be brought before the RTC, as the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court do not have any original jurisdiction over such petitions. And it continues, Mr. President.
First, 1 minute suspension. I don't
Minute
think-
suspension. Teka.
Nahihirapan ako, hindi ko makita yung page. Ralph, anong page?
Anong page yun? Where the... Last paragraph of...
No court below the Court of Appeals shall have jurisdiction. In effect, only the Court of Appeals can issue. Dapat, yes. Ano bang question mo? Oh, okay. That's correct. I can. Oh, the way it is.
Are we ready? Are we ready to resume?
Yes.
Session
Ready
is
to resume,
resumed.
Mr. President. Mr. President, the present situation is that the regional trial courts appear to have the authority to issue TROs, preliminary injunction, mandatory injunction, or in any case, dispute or controversy that directly or indirectly, I'm sorry, that under on page 93, the present situation is that the regional trial courts can issue injunctions against the SEC. We want to correct that because we do not believe that the RTC and the SEC should be on the same level of authority. The SEC's orders can be restrained only by the Court of Appeals, not the RTC. That is the import of lines 14
Yes, correct.
to 18.
Which I am against.
You
basically.
would want
The
the
status
regional
quo.
trial courts to
Correct.
be able to issue a TRO
Yes.
against the.
Because today, that is part of their jurisdiction.
Yes,
are
with that, well, we can debate on that,
Yeah.
but anyway.
The
what-
commercial courts are at the RTC level today.
Right, so we want to change that by this provision.
Correct.
We want to put the SEC at a level higher than the regional trial courts and allow, because if we continue to do that, allowing the RTC to issue TROs against the SEC is in effect a municipal trial court. This is the same level as a municipal trial court because the RTC can issue a restraining order against a municipal trial court. Now, to allow the RTC to have the same power over the SEC would lower the SEC to the level of a municipal trial court.
I understand. But the problem is,
And
those
then,
who want to
just
seek
allow me to
remedy,
finish, Mr. President. Under Rule 43 of the Rules of Court, appeals, ano ito? Appeals,
Appeals of judgment.
or judgments, appeals from judgments of the SEC should be brought to the Court of Appeals. And therefore, this is a recognition that the that the SEC is at least at the same level, is co-equal to the regional trial court.
So, Mr. President, there's a difference of opinion here, and I respect that opinion, but I have a different position on the
Yes,
matter.
Mr.
So
President. Yes.
let's leave it for the moment, Mr.
Yes,
President. No point in not debating the issue, but a final point, Mr. President. You know, I've noticed, and it's a thick bill, that there are many provisions here that provide the SEC with too much discretion and possible undue delegation of authority. Maybe at the appropriate time, we could delete many of these or provide the standards. Masyadong open-ended. For example, Section 2. Section 2. Section 7 of the Code is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 7 with regard to founder shares. Okay? Where the exclusive right to vote and be voted for in the election of directors is granted, it must be for a limited period not to exceed 5 years from the date of incorporation except in meritorious cases as determined by the Commission. There are just too many phrases. Maybe we should provide certain standards or delete it all the same.
As a general principle, we have no problem with
Thank
the
you very much,
position
Mr.
of Senator Recto.
Thank you. So I will not read anymore all these sections that have such phraseology, Mr.
Yes,
President.
yes.
Maybe one last question, Mr. President. As I promised the sponsor that I'll only take a few minutes.
Yeah, you have a few long minutes.
Substantial, Mr. President.
Okay, yes. No, but we are enjoying the debate.
Thank you, thank you. Now, I am surprised that in Section 64, Section 140 of the Code is hereby renumbered as Section 177 and amended to read as follows. This is again on the nationality and stock ownership in corporations. What I read earlier was the first paragraph. But the second paragraph, we are deleting here, pursuant to the duties specified by Article 14 of the Constitution. The National Economic and Development Authority shall from time to time, upon the recommendation of the Commission, wala yun dati, or other appropriate government agencies. This deals with the economic provisions of the Constitution. And in the Constitution does not even talk about the recommendation of the Commission. We're adding an additional standard here. Make a determination on whether the corporate vehicle has been used by any corporation, business, or industry to frustrate the provisions of this code. But the intention of the original was pursuant to the duties specified by the Article 14 of the Constitution, frustrate the provisions thereof. So maybe at the appropriate time, we can take away the commission here.
The recommendation.
The
The need for the
recommendation
recommendation
of the Commission. And clearly the mandate of the original Corporation Code was to follow Article 14 of the Constitution. But here they want it deleted.
We are willing to review the powers, expanded powers, if you may call it, which the bill proposes to grant to the
Yes, thank
SEC,
you.
and receive the proposed amendments of the gentleman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Senator Recto. Any other interpellation for today?
Mr. President, there is one more senator listed, and that is Senator Villar. However, I discussed with Senator Villar the issues that that concerns her, and our agreement is that she will submit the proposed amendments. I think there are about 4 areas, and we have agreed that we will take this up with that we will review these amendments, and from a preliminary discussion, it is not really that crucial. I mean, it is not that difficult to favorably act on them, and it is on that basis that I have the permission of Senator Villar that we can manifest that she's no longer going to interpolate. And because of that, Mr. President, there are no other senator who manifested their desire to interpolate. May we move to close the period of interpolation.
Majority Leader.
So moved, Mr. President.
Okay, so given the manifestation of Senator Drilon, the motion is to terminate the period of interpellation. Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1280 under Committee Report number 22.
Any objection? Hearing none, we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1280 under Committee Report number 22.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Resolution number 289.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the resolution expressing the sense of the Senate on matters relating to treaties and international agreements. The parliamentary status of this measure is that we are still in the period of interpolation, and I move that we recognize Senator Drilon, the principal author of the resolution, and to interpolate first Senator Pacquiao and then our Senate President.
With the permission of the Senate President, may I move that we defer further debates on this in the meantime, as we would want to work first on the substantive law, and this is the corporation code, which is quite difficult and urgent. The matter of the sense of the Senate can be taken up later on, so with the permission of the Majority Leader, may we defer consideration of proposed Senate resolution on the table.
Majority Leader?
1 minute suspension, Mr.
Minute
President.
suspension.
I just want to check lang with We'll just suspend consideration. I'll withdraw the motion and then ready to resume, Mr. President. I have my committee.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, considering that the gentleman from Iloilo would wish to defer the interpellations, let me move to suspend consideration of resolution number 289.
Is there any objection? There being none, we suspend consideration of proposed Senate Resolution number 289.
Without understanding.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1305 under Committee Report number 29.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved and Senate Bill number 1305 is in order.
Mr. President, this is the proposed expanded maternity leave law of 2017. The parliamentary status is that we're now in the period of interpellation. So may we recognize the sponsor, Senator Risa Ontiveros, and to interpellate Senator Laila de Lima.
The sponsor, Senator Ontiveros, is recognized and to interpellate Senator de Lima.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the very esteemed sponsor of this measure yield to just very few questions?
Yes, of course, to my sister in the Senate.
But for starters, Mr. President, I'd like to manifest that I fully support the bill that proposes to increase maternity leave benefits for women.
Thank you, Mr.
As a
President.
woman, but past already the childbearing stage, I definitely am for this measure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And
I
as
am in the same situation as the gentlewoman from Bicol, and all of us women, and I believe men of the Senate are of course doing this also for our younger sisters and the younger couples, the younger families of the Philippines.
At sabi nga nila, may kasabihan po na maiintindihan mo lamang ang hirap ng isang magulang sa pagkakataon na ikaw ay isa na rin na magulang. At yung isa pang kasabihan, every time na nanganganak ang isang ina, ay actually, she is putting her life also at risk.
Kahit nga po habang buntis pa lang, Mr. President, yung kasabihan nga natin na ang babaeng nagdadalang tao, ang babaeng nanganganak, yung isang paana sa hukay.
At meron din po tayong, bukod po sa ating saligang batas na talaga namang nagsasabi that we should provide protections for mothers under certain treaties also, international human rights treaties, we have the same obligations. I'm referring to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Child Rights Convention, and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And
Yes, Mr. President.
again, all of these instruments, human rights instruments, assure that pregnant women be fully protected. Kaya lang po, nakakabahala talaga na according to a UNICEF data, there are 160 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births, with roughly 11 women dying every day. So even with the passage of the RH law, nakakabahala pa rin po ang ganitong datos. Kaya karapat-dapat lang na pag natin kilalanin ang kahalagahan ng sapat na maternity leave. So just few clarificatory questions, Mr. President. Now, sections 4 and 5 stipulates that women employed in public and private sector, respectively, may avail of an additional 30 days leave on condition that the employee communicates such intention at least 45 days before the end of the ordinary maternity leave. My concern po ay tungkol sa mga tinatawag na mga pregnancy-borne diseases that are not foreseen. That takes place on emergency situation, katulad po ng postpartum preeclampsia, for example, which in some cases, according to a study, they develop within 48 hours of childbirth. Certainly, in this situation, I would say that the 45-day notice is not feasible. And in fact, there are cases decided by the Supreme Court relating to illnesses that may fall out of the regular maternity leave. Perhaps the staff of the very good sponsor would just take a look at the cases of Del Monte Philippines, Inc. versus Lolita Velasco, GR number 153447, and also some other cases, Lacque Drug, Inc. versus Maria Lourdes Belga, na talaga naman that the Supreme Court had taken note of certain situations where indeed there would be prolonged leave of absence because of pregnancy-borne diseases that afflict the mother. Now, would a good sponsor therefore consider an amendment which would in effect dispense with the 45 advance notice in cases of emergency that will require additional leave?
Yes, Mr. President, because there are indeed emergency cases among pregnant or delivering or in fact postpartum women that cannot humanly be known or anticipated beforehand. I would be willing at the proper time, Mr. President, good gentlewoman, to accept an amendment to waive this 45-day notice in the case of medical emergencies.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, on the issue of security of tenure, Section 12 of the bill provides that employees who avail of the extended maternity leave benefit are assured of security in employment or tenure. However, the same section provides that transfer to parallel position or reassignment from one organization unit to another in the same agency shall be allowed without reduction in rank, status, and salary. I have some reservation about this, although I know that this seems to be a standard provision allowing the transfer to parallel positions or reassignment for as long as there is no demotion in rank, status, and salary. But I'm thinking that would this exemption not amount also to an act of discrimination in another context? Since it will open the possibility of enabling the transfer or reassignment that is not in the best interest of the returning employee who availed of the maternity leave or who is entitled to the maternity leave. Can we therefore, Mr. President, in lieu of the exemption, stipulate to prohibit transfer or reassignment? May we get the thoughts of the good sponsor?
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you. In fact, I will, at the proper time again, seriously consider to accept an amendment on this section, and precisely because of the context that we are committed to the principles of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. We are still in the Senate of this 17th Congress fighting to pass a security of tenure bill under the leadership of Senator Villanueva, the chair of our Senate Committee on Labor. And therefore, as this bill also seeks to be part of a package of laws upholding the rights of working women, it would not, under any circumstances, tolerate constructive dismissal. So to repeat, Mr. President, I will certainly consider to accept such an amendment at the proper time.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the good sponsor. Doon naman po sa Section 13, this is about the periodic review by certain agencies of government like the Civil Service Commission, the DOLE, and the SSS. Now, I'm sure that the good sponsor is quite aware of the role of the CHR as gender ombud under the Magna Carta Women Act or Republic Act 9710. Would the good sponsor have no objection to CHR in its capacity as gender ombud also jointly undertake the periodic review and repertorial work contemplated under this provision?
No objection at all, Mr. President, and at the proper time, I will certainly accept the amendment, and I thank the good gentlewoman from Bicol for pointing out that important oversight in this bill.
And still, on CHR as the gender ombud, Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, would it be possible to provide for sanctions or penalties for those who do not allow female employees the extended maternity leave in this bill and assign it to the gender ombud for investigation of the complaints? Because I don't see in the proposed measure a body which is tasked to investigate any such violations.
Again, Mr. President, I will accept that amendment at the proper time to include criminal penalties for employers who would violate maternity leave for their women employees.
Thank you. And for my final point, my final question, although I just want to try if this is possible. The bill allows or makes it possible for a covered female employee to enable or allocate 30 days of her leave benefits to the father of the child, whether or not they're married, or relative within fourth degree of consanguinity or current partner sharing household with the employee. Now, definitely I recognize, I acknowledge the wisdom also of giving the covered female employee the option of allocating a portion of the maternity leave benefits to the father of the child. Now, I'm concerned about situations of domestic violence taking place in intimate relationships. Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, will this bill guarantee that only those who are not guilty of violence against women can avail of this privilege?
Yes, Mr. President, good gentlewoman, there is a built-in, in a sense, guarantee in this Section 6 on allocation of maternity leave credits, because such leave sharing would only be upon the initiative and upon the consent of the mother.
And although sometimes VAL cases are really very difficult.
Well, that is true, Mr. President. If my answer at this, during this period of interpellation does not fully reassure the good gentlewoman from Bicol about her important concern, I would be willing to listen to and consider a possible amendment at the proper time. Additionally, Mr. President, if there is a vow case, there could be a protection order issued either by the barangay or by the court, depending on the type of protection order sought by the victim. Then the father could not even approach the mother and the child
therefore would
to
not be
begin with,
entitled.
and therefore would not be entitled and could not physically or humanly be able to avail of such shared leaves to care for the child.
And of course, we're only talking about those where the victim would resort to court or would
Yes,
file for
Mr.
appropriate
President.
remedy, and not the unreported cases of vow.
Yes, Mr. President.
So as a final manifestation, Mr. President, I don't have any other question, but just a manifestation. Benefits under this bill, particularly the additional 45-day leave, will be aligned with the International Labor Organization Convention number 183 and on 183, maternity protection. Although the Philippines has not ratified Convention number 183, this measure, I should say, may pave the way for said ratification and at the same time help preserve health of women and their newborn. So I congratulate the sponsor for this yet another remarkable piece of legislation or proposed measure. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Sponsor.
Thank you to the good gentlewoman from Bicol for pointing out how fulfilling our international obligations or moving ahead through national legislation can be made to work together to protect the rights and uphold the benefit of working women. Thank you, Mr. President. I have
Can the chair ask?
Oh, of course, Mr.
few
President.
certainly, Mr. President.
When this was heard at the committee level, what was the reaction of the Employers Association?
Yes, Mr. President. The Employers Confederation of the Philippines, or ECOP, were active participants in the hearing, and I invited them to be part of the technical working group preparing our committee report. At the hearing, they expressed support to expand maternity leave benefits in the Philippines. There were a range of proposed expanded maternity leave in the 8 bills, which are consolidated in our committee report. And the ECOP said they would be willing to expand maternity leave up to 90 days from the existing 60 days. So at least they were open to adding to the paid maternity leaves of women in the private sector. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may I call for a 1-minute suspension?
A minute suspension. That was reopened.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, no other senator made a reservation to interpolate, so I move to terminate the period of interpolations on Senate Bill 1305 under Committee Report 29.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpellation for this measure is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1305 under Committee Report 29.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you so much, Mr. President and Majority Leader.
Mr. President, upon the request of Senator Poe, the author of SB 1254, the expanded Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, and after getting the consent of the concerned committee chairs, may I move that the primary referral of SB 1254 be transferred from the Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources to the Committee on Women, Family Relations and Gender Equity. So moved, Mr. President.
No secondary? Only primary? What is this?
This is a motion to change the primary, Mr. President.
Primary, okay. So, any objection to the motion? Hearing none, Senate Bill number 1254 is now primarily referred to the Committee on Women.
Women, Family, and Gender Relations,
Women,
Mr.
Family,
President.
and Gender Relations.
Sorry, Women, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, Mr. President.
So approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1279 under Committee Report number 21.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill number 1279 under Committee Report number 21 is now under consideration.
Mr. President, this is the Pagkain Pinoy para sa Batang Pinoy Act. May I be recognized to sponsor some committee amendments?
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, the committee would like to propose amendments as response to the questions raised in the period of interpellations conducted in the plenary. The committee also consulted concerned government agencies and other sectors, and therefore, we are going to propose some committee amendments, Mr. President.
Majority Leader, can the chair request for a minute suspension?
Yes, Mr. President.
Clarify. So session is suspended.
There's the committee amendments in the feeding program bill in your adjournment. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I'm putting on the majority floor leader hat currently and not
Yes.
the sponsor hat. Earlier, we would like to withdraw the motion earlier regarding committee, I'm sorry, Mr. President, this is as sponsor, not as majority floor leader. As sponsor of the bill, I would like to withdraw my motion earlier to open the period of committee amendments. And now, Mr. President, we would like
This
to...
be, yes, so the motion is withdrawn.
And now, Mr. President,
Can
we
we
would like...
clarify why? Because this is a substitute bill.
Yes,
Okay,
Mr.
put
President.
it on
And now we would like to move to open the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? There being none, approved.
Mr. President, for the record, Senator Poe and our Senator Poe's office and our office worked on these individual amendments, Mr. President. On page 2, line 1, insert a new section 4 on coverage, which shall read as follows. Section 4, coverage. The National School Feeding Program is a free and nutrition-driven program for all students from kinder to senior high school. The food shall be served in school for 5 days a week and shall complete the duration of 200 feeding days in a school year, semicolon, provided, comma, that in the first 5 years of the implementation of the program, comma, the Department of Education, in parenthesis DepEd, shall be allowed to create variations in the coverage of the program through its implementing rules and regulations. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the proposed amendment is approved.
Mr. President, I move that the subsequent sections shall also be renumbered accordingly.
Secretariat, please take note.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 1, on the title of the section, delete the word targeting and replace it with end poverty information. So
Any-
move.
Any objection? There being none, approved.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 2, after the word nationwide, insert and local.
Any objection? There being none, approved.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 4, add a new sentence after poverty, which shall read as follows. This system shall be utilized in monitoring the health and nutrition of children being subject to the program. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, approved.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 5, delete the words Department of Education and delete the parenthesis in DepEd.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 6, delete the phrase a menu and replace it with several standardized menus. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 7, delete the word all before the word public, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 7, delete the phrase menu needs to be and replace it with menus shall be contextualized and. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 11, on the title of the section, delete the word and before the word assistance and add the phrase and periodic quality assurance before the phrase on food preparation. The title shall now read as technical training, assistance, and periodic quality assurance on food preparation, safety, and sanitation. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, approved.
On page 2, line 16, after the words food safety, add the words and cleanliness, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 17, before the word and, add the term waste management. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, approved.
On the same page, line 17, after the word management, add a new sentence which will read as follows. The municipal/city health office in coordination, if I may repeat, Mr. President, the municipal/city health office, comma, in coordination with DepEd, comma, shall conduct periodic quality assurance visits to the kitchens to ensure that the standards of the program are upheld and met, period. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Approved.
On page 2, line 29, insert a new section C, which shall read as follows. Letter C, kitchen run by a community-based service provider, dash. Public basic education institutions may acquire the meals from a kitchen operated by a community-based service provider, period. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, I move to renumber the subsequent sections.
Any, yes, that should follow. So, Secretary, please take note.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 2, line 31, insert a new section to read as follows. Gulayan sa paaralan, period dash. The schools shall devote a portion of land or space for the cultivation of vegetables and other nutrient-rich plants as identified by the members of the NNC, period. Schools lacking in land shall adopt modern gardening technologies with the assistance of the Department of Science and Technology, in parentheses DOST, and the city or municipal agricultural officers, period. Parents shall also be encouraged to maintain a similar program in their own households. Next paragraph. The produce from the Gulayan sa Paaralan shall be the principal source of basic ingredients in the school's feeding program, period. So moved, Mr. President.
The text also contains right now a Gulayan sa Paaralan.
I'm going to move to delete that, Mr.
Okay.
President.
So, any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, delete, on page 2, delete lines 32 to 37.
On page 2. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, maybe I can stop moving to renumber the subsequent sections, Mr. President. Can I just have an omnibus motion to renumber accordingly after?
Because the Gulayan sa Paaralan would have a letter A, no? Letter A for it. Yeah. The new section.
Yes, Mr. President.
So just take note, Secretariat, please.
On page number 16, on page 3, delete lines 12 to 16, beginning from the program until the words area typologies, and replace it with a new section to read as follows. National Nutrition Distribution System, period dash. The DepEd shall create a 5-year plan to fully implement the program, period. This act shall authorize DepEd to prioritize the implementation of this program based on the following standards, colon, letter A, existence of working models of central kitchens run by basic education institutions, comma, local government units, comma, non-government organizations, comma, or community-based service providers, semicolon. Letter B, existence of exemplary models of school-based / in-house kitchens, semicolon. Letter C, schools with the highest population of undernourished pupils, semicolon. Letter D, schools in conflict areas or disaster-stricken areas. Next paragraph, the DepEd shall build its capacity to fully implement this program on the 5th, parenthesis 5th, 5th year of its implementation, period. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3, line 18, on the title of the section, delete the word preparation and replace it with mobilization. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3, line 26, after the word program, add a new sentence which will read as follows. The DepEd shall mobilize community organizations to continue nutrition education outside of the school, period. DepEd shall also assess and review the program through regular consultations with the DepEd personnel at the regional and division levels, comma, concerned local government representatives, comma, parent volunteers, comma, the parent-teacher associations, in parentheses PTAs, comma, and other stakeholders, period. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3, line 27, on the title of the section, delete the word produce or produce and replace it with the phrase goods and services. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3, line 28, delete the phrase ensure that preference for procurement of produce is given to producers and / or suppliers within the locality, and replace it with the phrase promote the participation of producers, comma, suppliers, and or service contractors within the locality in the procurement process for the program. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, after line 29, add the following paragraphs to read as follows. The program shall prioritize the participation of local and community-based producers, comma, suppliers, and or service contractors in the public procurement process. The procuring entities may adopt, in parentheses, negotiated procurement community participation as an alternative method of public procurement in accordance with the implementing rules and regulations for Republic Act number 9184, otherwise known as the Government Procurement Reform Act, and specific guidelines to be issued by the Government Procurement Policy Board, in parentheses GPPB, for the program, period. The GPPB is mandated to coordinate with DepEd and consult with representatives of concerned government agencies, local government units, non-government organizations, and other community stakeholder groups in the preparation of the guidelines. Next paragraph. In procurement modalities which require the purchase of individual ingredients, the procuring entity shall group and bid out the various ingredients, supplies of the program on a per category/lot basis, such as, but not limited to, grocery items, vegetables, pork meat, chicken meat, rice, water, and kitchen utensils or supplies to maximize participation of community-based producers and/or suppliers within the locality. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, may I have a 1-minute suspension?
Minute suspension.
Mr. President, I wish to, before we resume, I will just revisit this later because although technically it does include, because of the clause, including but not limited to, other meats such as beef and fish, I'm wondering why this was not suggested by the GPPB when we received this amendment. So I'm just clarifying, if I may revisit this again, Mr. President, because it only refers to pork and chicken. So I'm wondering why there's no beef or seafoods, Mr. President. So if I may, Mr. President, we can continue with the others while I get clarification on this particular clause. But it's already been carried, Mr. President, no?
Yes,
It was accepted.
approved already. Yeah.
Maybe we can just revisit again later, Mr. President. That's okay.
Okay, so we
Ready
can,
to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, on page 4, delete lines 1 to 23.
In effect, we're deleting sections 13 and 14 of the pending measure.
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
President.
So, any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
On page 5, line 2, after the word assistance, add the phrase, such as, but not limited to, the establishment of central kitchens, training of kitchen personnel and managers, transportation of meals, So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 2, before the words the local government, delete the word of and replace it with from. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Would you wish for me to read the...
Can we now read how?
Yes,
how
Mr.
that-
President.
How that section will.
That section,
Now
Mr.
read
President, will now read as follows. A portion of the Special Education Fund, parenthesis SEF, shall be reserved for assistance, such as, but not limited to, the establishment of central kitchens, training of kitchen personnel and managers, transportation of meals, from the local government in the operation of the National School Feeding Program in their locality, period.
Any objection? There be none, motion is approved.
On page 5, line 14, delete the following, Mr. President, of 10 billion, parenthesis 10 billion pesos, is hereby appropriated for the implementation of this act and shall be sourced from the proceeds of the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office, PCSO, in parenthesis, and the Philippine Gaming and Amusement Corporation, parenthesis PAGCOR. Initially, Initially, a substantial portion shall be sourced from the social fund of the Office of the President. I move to delete that, Mr. President.
So the motion is to delete?
Yes, I will be moving
Yes.
to replace it with another line, Mr. President.
Any, delete for the purposes of replacing. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move to replace that, Mr. President, with necessary to carry out the initial implementation of this act shall be sourced from the current budget of the Department of Education. The next paragraph, which reads as, thereafter, such sum necessary for its continuous implementation shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act, shall form part of this first paragraph. In short, Mr. President, if I may, it shall now read as follows. The amount necessary to carry out the initial implementation of this act shall be sourced from the current budget of the Department of Education. Thereafter, such sum necessary for its continuous implementation shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. So move, Mr.
As
President.
one paragraph.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May I ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session is suspended. The motion is to delete this paragraph, replace it with this one.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I will now end my individual amendments, and I think other senators wish to also present their individual amendments, Mr. President.
We'll keep the period open. And so is a motion to suspend the consideration?
Yes, Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1279 under Committee Report 21.
Any objection? There being none, we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1279 under Committee Report number 21.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, February 27, 2017.
Any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, February 27, 2017.